Welcome to the Wayne and Kathy show. So today is October 15th, and we delayed a little bit, but today I'm gonna just bring you a feature story, which is a quite good story. I believe you would find that you probably learn a lot from it. We all know that California has been leading the way for most of the ultra-left policies, including the critical race theory. But do you know that the first school board in the nation which adopted a resolution to block critical race theory in its classrooms was also from California? Paso Robles School Board did that in August. You may wonder where Paso Robles School Board located at. It's Paso Robles, the city actually located in between. It's a halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. So how did they do it? I sat down with the board president, Chris Arend, who broke down how they handled the situation when the controversies first arose. It's noteworthy that Chris is actually an Army veteran who practiced law in both Germany and the US. So Chris told me that at the start of this year, the school board was approached by a local diversity group and suggested the board to adopt a resolution against racism. At the same time, the topic of ethnic studies came up, because the ethnic studies course was, very frequently discussed by the California schools. And then the staff of the board drafted a resolution by cutting and paste from some of the resolutions passed by other school boards around the nation, and then presented to the board. The school board members actually rejected after taking a look. So what's the reason that they reject it?
Well, it talked about white privilege and this type of stuff, and it was because it was laced with critical race theory doctrine. I've been studying critical race theory now for a while. I wrote a paper last year called The Myth of Systemic Racism, where I dealt with that concept in a sort of an intellectual manner, a lawyer-like manner. I rejected that, and instead I drafted our resolution condemning racism, which was straight down the Martin Luther King line. And that's where I see the big ideological divide in our country on the topic of race, which is, I think, the biggest ideological conflict in the country at the moment anyway. And that's either the critical race theory line that groups people either as an oppressor or an oppressed. They divide up 330 million people into two big camps. Is in effect what they do, and say racism is everywhere. Or you go down the Martin Luther King line, which looks at the individual and says people should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Well, in fact, we used that famous quote of his from the I Have a Dream speech in Washington in 1963. We used that as the intro sentence for our resolution.
Yeah, so then it came the topic of ethnic study course, which is a very heated issue in California. So how did the board handle that topic?
And we had this demand for this course among our students, and we thought ethnic studies is a perfectly legitimate field of study, looking at the trials and tribulations of various ethnic groups that have come to this country at one time or another, and have made up this melting pot. We used to call it, when I was in school a long time ago, we used to call it the melting pot. I've heard other people talk about stew or mixed salad. I don't know, but this is the concept, and we view people as individuals and not as members of these big groups, oppressor and oppressed. Well, we debated the topic of ethnic studies for quite a while, and then the course was presented to us. We struck some of the language in there that talked about white privilege. We insisted that there be more balance in there, some work by Thomas Sowell some work by Ayan Hirsi Ali as some of the supplemental reading for the course. And we passed the course based on three main principles. There would be no critical race theory in it, none of this white guilt tripping or any of that type of stuff going on. We will not have hindsight bias in it. In other words, looking back at and condemning many of the founding fathers for having slaves, when in that day and age, slavery was common throughout virtually the entire world, with a couple of little exceptions. And then also the concept that historic events and historic persons be analyzed in their historic context. Well, that issue got resolved. We adopted a course, which, by the way, is coming along fine, very popular, is doing well, is not easy for the kids because we have an excellent teacher teaching it. And it's a good quality, constructive ethnic studies course, as opposed to what I understand they're doing in the school district of Hayward on the East Bay.
So then the board took a step further to try to adopt a resolution to ban critical race theory teaching. As a lawyer, also the chairman of the board, Chris, volunteered to draft the resolution. They held 3 public hearings to debate the issue. Then the superintendent and the board staff also presented 2 other versions of the draft resolution, which are pretty general. But the board eventually adopted the version that Chris drafted.
I ran because many years ago, the general resolution is worthless because you have to define what critical race theory is. It's this is one thing that was clear to me in all the debate about our resolution, all the public comment. People who were speaking out for critical race theory, people who were speaking out against critical race theory, they knew they were for it or against it, but they really didn't know what it is, which is, so you can't just take a general resolution and say we're going to ban critical race theory. You have to give the teachers, your staff, the community, you have to give them guidance. And what I did, I drafted the resolution based on the content of critical race theory. Our resolution, which is available online, is especially it's easy to get if you Google on Fox News, for instance. They published an article on their nationwide online publication on the day after we had done it, and they've got the resolution available there. But the first part prohibits about 5 of the main assumptions upon which critical race theory is based, teaching them as dogma, as gospel, and then we ban the teaching of about 10 individual teachings derived from those basic principles. And we basically just gut the possibility of teaching a course based on critical race theory. Now, it seems our teachers have got the message. We haven't had any big problems. It's everybody understands the guidance. It's our ethnic studies course instructor. He definitely understands the guidance. He's a very liberal fellow, but he's a very professional man, just highly professional. And he's doing a bang-up job on that course and staying within the parameters we set. So that's sort of how we got to our resolution banning critical race theory. I think we are maybe the first local school district in the country to have done it, or at least one of the first. I know a school district in Colorado passed a similar resolution about 2 days later.
So it's interesting that Chris observed that both sides of the people who are for and against CRT, many of them do not really understand what critical race theory is. It is actually one of the main aspects people have been arguing about in this controversial topic. So to Chris, what is the biggest myth or the key issue that people don't understand about what critical race theory is? He also explained why CRT is an ideology, not a theory or method.
It gets to the basic definition of what critical theory is, and critical thinking. Now, many of the people who speak out in favor of critical race theory say it's a method of applying critical thinking to the study of history. Wrong. Critical thinking goes back to Socrates at least, and it's, the scientific method, rational thought, deductive, inductive reasoning, all these various things, logic, which we love our children to learn, and what we are practicing in our ethnic studies course is critical thinking. Critical theory goes back basically to a guy named Hegel, a German philosopher, and from him through Marx and so on through the Frankfurt School. And it's a way of looking at society where you, in effect, divide society into two big groups. This goes back to Hegel, who talked about thesis, antithesis, and out of that resulting in truth being synthesis, sort of like overlapping sets in mathematics, the overlapping circles in mathematics, that type of thing. Well, Marx took it and said, I'll analyze society by this dialectic, setting two groups. He did it with the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and they thought that would lead to the great communist revolution. It didn't, because that happened elsewhere. That happened not in the capitalist society, happened in Russia. And then the Frankfurt School took up the idea, though, of two big groups, and they said, what could that possibility be? Why didn't it happen in the West? And one of the thoughts that became rather prevalent already in the 1920s and continued on, was sort of migrated here when some of the members of the Frankfurt School came to the United States, was the dividing line is perhaps race. And of course, that was pretty obvious in those days with the Jim Crow laws, especially the situation in the South, but throughout American society. And they thought that that would lead to basically a split. And that would be the fault line which would bring down the capitalist society and lead to, communist utopia or whatever. Well, this concept was picked up later. But anyway, to get back to the thing, we have this critical theory which divides society into two groups, and that is an ideology. It has a few fixed premises. Those premises are set forth in our resolution. One of the main ones being racism is everywhere. Racism is natural. It's the way society does business. That's virtually a quote from the textbook called Critical Race Theory by two of the leading proponents. Anyway, this is an ideology that is written in stone, based on a few immutable concepts that they have, that being the main one. They've got others. One of my favorites is the so-called voice of color thesis, which basically says people by virtue of their race have greater authority, be it moral authority or just greater authority, expertise for discussing topics of race. It's sort of I say it's sort of like the Senator Hirono from Hawaii back in the Kavanaugh hearings. You might remember she had that famous sentence where she said, it's time for men to just sit down and shut up. Well, the voice of color thesis is basically, it's time for all you other folks out there to sit down and shut up. But we challenge that one. So those are sort of a couple of the main foundations there that make it an ideology, whereas critical thinking is a methodology. You never know what's going to come out. You're always kicking the intellectual tires on a concept. That is, if anything, that is the main fundamental difference. One, critical race theory is an ideology based on assumptions fixed in stone, and critical thinking is what moves us forward, what really leads to progress.
So Chris believes that while most of the supporters of a CRT don't really understand CRT or are deceived, but those CRT theorists clearly know what it is and the purpose they are pushing it.
Many of them would frankly be horrified to hear some of the things that critical race theorists argue. One of the leading critical race theorists nowadays is an author named Ibram X. Kendi. You may have heard his name. He wrote the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Mm-hmm. And some of his statements in there are absolutely outrageous. One of them is, and I'm paraphrasing now, is along the lines, the only way to combat past discrimination is to have present discrimination. The only way to combat future discrimination is to have present discrimination. In other words, calling for a race-based society, dividing people up into ethnic groups, and going against all these concepts such as merit and stuff like that. I mean, just outrageous things. He's the same guy who proposed that we have a Department of Anti-Racism, which would be sort of a non-elected super department that would have the authority to veto any law in the United States or anywhere and depose elected officials if they were deemed to be racist. I mean, this is straight out of George Orwell. This stuff. What it's amazing in the quote there, the Department of Anti-Racism, he abbreviates DOA, which most people understand to be dead on arrival. But I mean, these things, it sounds silly, but you got to realize these people seriously have these thoughts. These are their ideas. This is what they would like to realize. There was a famous poster about 2 years ago, published by the National Museum of African American Culture and History, which is a subdivision of the Smithsonian. And it was a poster about whiteness. And it raised a tremendous amount of anger. And it was withdrawn within about a week, but you can still find it on the internet. And they played down, oh, this was just a little mistake. No, it wasn't. To put out a publication like that, it goes through, God only knows how many sets of hands and eyes reviewing it before it gets published under the name of the museum. And it shows you what these people really think. And the fact that they withdrew it so fast when they got a bunch of anger also shows that they know exactly how ridiculous these concepts are. But they flog them off. In many ways, it's become a scam, in my view. I just heard recently somebody talking to the diversity, inclusion, and equity scam. So many diversity consultants out there charging lots and lots of money to hold seminars at a corporation and sell them absolution from their sins. It's pretty strange.
And Chris, explain more about this diversity, inclusion, equity scam.
The people out there who are making tons of money off the fact that a lot of Americans are kind of weak. This whole white fragility insanity that was going around and still goes around. That stuff is crazy, but they're making a ton of money off of selling white guilt, white fragility. Look at all the diversity consultants out there. Look at all the diversity officers we've got in corporations, all the diversity seminars that are being offered. We get a ton of them offered at school districts. We don't use these things, but a lot of school districts are paying a lot of money for diversity consultants. My guess is, and I haven't seen any actual numbers, but my guess is we're talking, when we look at all the diversity industry, including the professors at every school in the country who are, they've got their sort of diversity CRT style professors there, we're talking a multi-billion-dollar industry. That's pretty big stuff.
Oftentimes, the superintendents or the school boards tell parents that they are not teaching CRT, but Chris believes that they are not telling the truth. He used virus to describe CRT.
When the critical race theorists talk about CRT, they usually talk about it's just a method that's taught only in law schools. It only comes from the law schools. It's not being taught in high schools or other schools. And it's just one way of analyzing the legislative history, the history of our law and institutions. No, it's not. All you got to do is read the books. Critical Race Theory by Delgado and Stefancic. Those are two authors of it. It's the classic textbook on it, and it's got just lots and lots of crazy things they say in there, including up front the voice of color thesis, the idea that racism is everywhere, it's normal, it's the way we do business. I don't know anybody really who likes to be called a racist just because of the color of their skin. And I think even a lot of flaming liberals would really not like to be called racist. I can't remember the last time I oppressed anybody. I'm sure it's been at least a week since I oppressed anybody. This stuff is absurd. It's absurd, and the thing is, there's a lot of guilt tripping out there, and it's become a racket. Because one of the things I noticed researching it, I found one law review article. Now I don't have access to, I've just got access to the normal internet, and I surfed the internet. I found one law review article from 1998 against critical race theory that was very critical of it. Nothing else. And I contacted the professor. He told me he had submitted the article to 66 different law reviews, and only one had the courage to publish it. And I know other cases, it pops up in the news at times how professors, if they do anything that's questionable under critical race theory, they have hell to pay. It can cost them their careers. There was a lot of suppression. This critical race theory, it started off about 1970s, early 1970s it started off, and it did first start off as sort of just a minor little group that went into law schools around. Professor Derek Bell at the time moved into through the law schools. From there, though, the concepts spread throughout the social science departments, and it's sort of like a virus that then got out of control a few years ago and has really contaminated society. It's a very divisive doctrine, this critical race theory.
On the surface, critical race theory is spreading through all over the country just in recent years. But Chris believes that it's actually long coming.
When the critical race theorists talk about CRT, they usually talk about it's just a method that's taught only in law school. The concepts have been out there for quite some time, and they've been practiced for quite some time. Affirmative action was, even before critical race theory was even really out there as a concept, even before around the time critical legal studies, as it was called, were being talked about by Derek Bell. We had affirmative action. It has then spread through the academia without really being able to be challenged, because if you challenged it, you were called a racist. And who wants to be called a racist, right? So it spread through there, and now it's invaded. So many of the policies have invaded institutions. Some of the policies that they look at treating more the symptoms of the problem than the actual causes. The high crime rate. How do you solve the high crime rate, high imprisonment rate, where we know Black Americans, Hispanic Americans are often, they are higher represented in prison populations. How do you create equity? How do you just alter the result? You treat the symptom. You release a bunch of them. They talk about jury nullification, which a jury, knowing that a murderer or that a crime has been committed, let the guy go because he's of a certain race. We actually had that in the O.J. Simpson trial way back when. The O.J. Simpson trial was actually a classic case of a jury letting an obvious double murderer off the hook because he was a Black guy. It was pretty apparent that was going to happen too once they moved the trial out of the Santa Monica area into downtown LA.
So in regards to the memo that Attorney General Garland sent to FBI and other law enforcement in regards to how, potentially they would invest parents who are outspoken against the vaccine mandate and the critical race theory. What's Chris's take on it?
It's intended to also have a chilling effect, as it's called in First Amendment law, free speech. They talk about having a chilling effect. And I'm sure it was intended to have a chilling effect on people exercising their right to free speech. Yeah.
So while FBI could investigate parents who express emotional opinions against critical race theory or vaccine mandate, on the other hand, it doesn't seem that the FBI will investigate the activist who intimidated Senator Sinema by following her into restroom and filming it, trying to pressure her to vote for the $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill.
Well, the FBI is unfortunately very politicized now. I hate to say it. Just like the entire Justice Department, it's a disgrace. But that type of intimidation, yeah, and it's the only way to stand up to that intimidation is not to let it get to you. You just basically tell them to go to hell. It's I had some experience with that. I lived most of my adult life in Germany, actually, and that's where I studied law both in California and in Germany, and spent most of my profession as a German lawyer in Germany. And while I was over there as a student, I had some run-ins with East German trained West German students that they would go over to East Germany and get trained in how to raise hell in West Germany and come back then for the next school year. And I had a couple run-ins with them, and I learned very early on the only way you can deal with them is you just gotta stand up to them, and show them that you're tougher than they are.
So for those parents and the community members who are concerned about what's going on, how should they deal with it? Chris offered his suggestions.
First of all, we've got to get people elected to school boards. Parents have got to take an interest in their schools. Good individualist parents who want to push for academic achievement, who are in favor of academic discipline, are in favor of promoting, just good, solid work there in schools. They have to get themselves elected to the school boards. They have to run for office. It's usually not the most glamorous political office, I guarantee you. You work with a lot of just everyday stuff, but you have to have good, I think, well-educated conservatives running for school board. Find people who are willing to do that, then support them, encourage them to run for school board. It takes a little bit of effort for most of us. For me, this is the first time I've ever held any office, any public office. I ran back in 2018 and was elected. I don't know whether I'll run again. I'm a bit older, but it's something that people have got to do. They got to get out there and run for school board. And at the present time, look at your existing school boards and identify possible like-minded individuals on the school boards. Often there are going to be a couple of conservative folks on a school board who may be in the minority, may be outvoted from time to time, but they need encouragement, they need support. It really feels good to know that people are contacting you, say, I really like how you stand on whatever the issue is. That's a big thing. Then concerned parents have got to inform themselves about the issues. They have to, if you're going to talk about CRT, you should at least know what it is. Our resolution is a great cheat sheet. It's a great cheat sheet. It's basically one page. It'll give you the main premises, the main teachings, know what it is, and then ask yourself on each one of those, do I really want the school teaching this type of garbage to my kid?
So talking about running for school boards, Chris said that was his first time to run and hold a public officer's position. So what is Chris's own experience of running?
I ran because many years ago, matter of fact, the same Dorian Baker is a personal friend here in the area. She had suggested I run. I said, well, it wouldn't be appropriate at the time because my son was going to a parochial school. But then in August of 2018, just before the filing deadline, she told me some of the problems with the school district, said they could really use you. And I said, okay, duty calls. And so I decided to run, and I put some effort into it. I bought my little posters and stuff like that and publications and bought some radio ads and spent about $3,000 in total on my campaign to get elected. and it worked out fine. And I've been having fun at it too. I've always been interested in education and various social topics. Otherwise, I wouldn't have studied the law. And so I've been enjoying the work, but I do not get intimidated. And yes, people have tried by just insults and stuff like that. They look at you nasty. So what?
And Chris emphasized the importance of the school boards.
Unfortunately, a lot of people on the political left, and especially the extreme political left, have gotten elected to school boards because they recognized that that's where one can influence the future. And we can influence the future. We have the power within certain limits to determine the curriculum. And we can tell the teachers what they can teach and what they can't teach. In grades K through 12, there is no such thing as academic freedom. This is something many teachers are not aware of. The school board is the voice of the citizenry, and we determine what the curriculum is within the parameters set by state law.
California Governor Gavin Newsom recently signed into a controversial bill requiring high school students in California to take ethnic studies classes in order to graduate. Chris said that this bill was actually watered down a lot in terms of the critical race theory, and the original version of the bill has a lot of CRT in it and generated a lot of opposition. The legislatures had to withdraw and revise it.
They scrubbed it. They really scrubbed it. You could go through those whole 881 pages. You will not find the term white privilege. It doesn't pop up in there once. And it is phrased in such an ambiguous manner. You can either go our route. As I mentioned, matter of fact, there's an organization out there, something like the Association for Constructive Ethnic Studies. They call it Constructive Ethnic Studies, and that's basically the line we've taken, though we haven't had contact with this association. But that's the line we took, or you can go the Hayward line and go down the critical race theory line and tell kids that your classmates over there of the other color, they're inherently racist. What a hell of a country to want to live in. To live in a country where we've got ethnic groups from all over the world here. We've got to get along, you would think. But here we've got then these hustlers out there trying to drive a wedge between groups based on ethnicity. It's terrible. It's terrible. I don't want to live in a country like that where they are more concerned in what your race is than anything else. That's crazy.
Yeah, so that also kind of reflects the importance of the local board, right, to decide.
Yeah, we can have a real big impact. We can make sure we can have so much impact that we determine whether our children grow up to be productive, good, socially aware and conscious American citizens, good citizens in a country that praises individualism and respects individual freedom, or whether they'll grow up to want to tear down this country. That's how much influence we can have.
And finally, Chris offered some other suggestions to the concerned parents in our audience.
Well, I say get informed, get out there, go to your school board meetings, raise these topics, identify people on your school boards who can take a stand, for example, on critical race theory, and who are willing to learn how really disgusting it is, because it's a disgustingly racist ideology. There's no other way around it. When the final analysis, it is a racist ideology, and that has to be countered. That has to be fought. You have to go to the meetings. You've got to get involved. If you don't, you'll be run over.
And for those people, especially parents who feel intimidated to speak at school board meetings, Chris also has some suggestions.
Well, it's good to look up various groups out there and hook up with a group. If you're going to a school board meeting and you don't know anybody in the audience and you're engaging in public comment for the first time, That's a pretty scary experience for most people. Public speaking is not something everybody likes to do. It's good to get associated with a group, link up with a group of concerned parents who have the same ideas. There's a nationwide organization called Moms for Liberty. They've got a good chapter in our county. I don't know what the situation is up there. But if you look around, you will find these organizations. There's this group called No Left Turn in Education. They've got mailing lists, and they've got they just put people in touch with each other. And then, you know, when you go to a school board meeting, you take maybe half a dozen of your friends with you, and you go there, and one or two of you then speak, and you don't necessarily have to be the first one speaking. You know, you get used to it a little bit. Inform yourself. I keep on stressing, inform yourself about the substance of critical race theory. That there's a lot written about it, very little written about the substance unless you go to the sources. But as again, our resolution, you pick that up, it's a one-page cheat sheet. Then you'll understand the basics of it.
Well, thank you so much again, Chris, for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, so that's the Paso Robles School Board President, Chris Arend. And the resolution he mentioned, I think our operator can show it, the C4 on our screen. That's if you read it, it's I think, yeah, like he said, it's a very good summary of what critical race theory is. It has a couple more pages about how they detailed what cannot be taught in the schools of this school district. So it is a very good reference. So Chris said that he will actually visit Bay Area in November to speak to some groups in the parents who would like to do something within their school districts. So yeah, how do you think what Chris just shared? Please leave your comments. And before we end, I just want to announce that in Sunday, we will have a live broadcast of the speech by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his top counsel on the U.S.-China policy and strategies, Miles Yu. They are here in the Bay Area. They will be holding a couple of speech events, and on Sunday, both of them will speak in San Jose at Calvary Chapel. So we will do a live broadcasting. So please stay tuned and follow our channel here and let your friends know about it too. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching and have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.